Okay. So I guess we'll start. We've got 13 with us here in Zoom. That's my family's lucky number, the Stack's lucky number. And then we're live streaming on Facebook as well. So there should be, more people joining there. So I'll monitor Facebook for comments at the end. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our author talk tonight. We're delighted to introduce author Paul Belford, or as he publishes under the name PD St. Clair, who is a Washington, D.C. based executive recruiter. He's a native of Long Island, New York, so left our own state here, and he now obviously lives in Washington since 1968. His own great-grandfather, Michael Moran, landed in New York during the Great Hunger on one of the coffin ships that evacuated about 1 million people from Ireland.
Moran.
So, yeah, we say Moran, is that how? Sorry, Michael Moran. And his great-grandfather. If everyone who's not presenting mutes themselves, that would be probably better, because we can hear everyone talking. So Michael founded the Moran Towing Corporation, whose tugboats still work in New York Harbor today. So he graduated from my own alma mater, Fordham University in the Bronx and Boston College, and he taught economics in Baghdad in Iraq at a Jesuit institution. And then, of course, he went about writing this trilogy of novels. So we're excited to hear about those tonight. And I think, Paul, I'll turn it over to you. So we're going to just kind of hear from Paul, how he wrote it, why he wrote it. He'll give us a little snippet from the book, and then we'll do questions and answers. So if you would like, as questions come to you, you can type them in the chat function down here in the bottom of your screen, or you can wait until the end and we'll have a discussion. So welcome everyone to, as I say, the Irish American Heritage Museum in Albany, New York. I'm Elizabeth Stack, Dr. Elizabeth Stack, the director from County Kerry originally, so I do still have the accent, and I say Moran instead of Moran, but that's okay. So over to you, Paul.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I've got something to read here. It's called Irish American, and not read, well, speak and read. So let me do that. It's maybe 15 minutes if that's not too long, but it'll give us a set. And we can have questions after that and talk about anything anybody wants to speak about after that. And of course, Elizabeth is running the show. So Elizabeth, thank you. I'm not particularly practiced at this, so please bear with me. I've done some practice runs, but we'll see how it works out. But in any event, on the website for the trilogy, there's this thing called Irish American, and it talks about Irish American and what it means to me. All right, so here we go. Irish American. The dead were everywhere, lying in fields and ditches, clustered in mud huts and caves, kneeled and crumpled in churches, eyes blackened, lungs caved. There were to the eye more dead than ever seemed to have been alive, and for the living could, it was time to leave. Yes, it was a long, hard pull from being Irish in America to Irish American, but it's done now and for some time too. Now, America itself came out of the simplest of human yearnings, fairness. Simple fairness was what was wanted, and the force and power that saw the founders to the realization of this quest was common sense, that we each and all are created equal, of worth by fact of birth. This to them was self-evident, as was most certainly that is upon each one of us to assume responsibility for the living of our own lives. America then was a deliberate act, one continuing now for some 240 years. So that's where it all started. That's the American part. What then about the Irish? Well, what I know about the Irish in America comes largely from the writing of the trilogy, Swamp Poodle trilogy. This began with St. Patrick's Day, a wholly fictional tale of the Rileys of Chevy Chase, Maryland, taking place in the spring of 1968. Then after some years of curing, the characters in it came to a need of explanation as to from where they were from and who they were and who they are. This led back in time to Swamp Poodle, it running from 1848 to 1936 and telling of the life and times of good Jack Hennessy. Swamp Poodle, the name given the slum just north of the Capitol building where clustered the famine Irish in Washington City, was to give me a far greater appreciation of the Irish here in America, the how and the why of them. It also gave me a deeper, richer understanding of the characters in St. Patrick's Day, which in turn led to Mount Olivet, the third book. It takes place in the September of 1993. Now, as it took form and purpose, Mount Olivet emerged in my mind as a third iteration of the Irish in America. It's subtitled The Rising, even suggesting an arrival at Journey's End. Excuse me, I was just distracted that. Journey's End. Yes, the Irish here, 1, 2, 3, and done. Well, maybe. The first and second iterations are pretty simple, really. The times all settled out and their characters lived. Certainly those of Swamp Rule. Yes, they of the Great Famine and its disgorging onto these shores of more than 1 million starving souls, mostly illiterate, many unshod. It was these and their succeeding generations who put the Irish in America. And it was these whose faith and purpose came to a grounding here as a never going back, ever. This was into the 1920s by some's reckonings, the 1930s by others. That was iteration 1. Iteration 2 now, it runs from there through the 1920s, maybe the 30s. A World War contested, iteration 2 is 1960s, 1970s. A World War contested and won at breaking down barriers and opening doors. Signs of Irish need not apply, scattered and trampled in the wake of national crisis, and then buried in a post-war boom of a wholly unanticipated scope and strength. Then come an Irish Catholic president, one of unbridled energy and optimism, followed by a Vatican II that cracked open the enclaves of Catholic America just as surely as it opened the windows of St. Peter's in Rome. Mass of a foreign tongue, a faith kept safe from questioning thought, those not other damned to perdition for all of eternity. That world is gone now, all gone and near that quick. The third iteration, well, it brings with it nuance and subtle complexities. We had the metrics to mark our trekking through iterations 1 and 2. So many things done and owned, academic degrees earned, partnerships and promotions fairly won, boxes checked, gains made. There was a toast I remember in common usage then, to the Irish, none better. Yes, a phrase to reassure, to claim a place, a ranking. Yet for much of iteration 2, it was a we comparing ourselves to a them who didn't compare ourselves to themselves at all, save in quiet disparagement. But over the course of iteration 2, the metrics did close, coming to nil as it ran its course, the differences now resting largely in distinctions of association, these driven by common and mutual preference, sets of mind as much as anything else. They're breathing easy now, all settling in. So then, as we stand in iteration 3, secure in all things meaningful in society and before the law, it might be usefully asked, how did this happen? What did we do? Must we have it in to be where we are? Indeed, if we are now fully American, what made us so and what of before? Well, the Irish coming over, they certainly knew of the founders' yearning for fairness. Landless in their own land, literally starving in their measly plots, yes, they knew all about a yearning for fairness. And in the ache of hunger and loss, and the wanton strife of their lives in trekking, they too came to a knowing of the need for and the meaning of the core values on which the place to where they had come had been founded: individual worth and personal responsibility. Yes, shunted to the wrong side of the tracks that many of them laid, they built their own place, their own America. And in the schools they raised and the orphanages too, they were taught to love no less than they were taught to add numbers and dispel words. By the faith that both marked and bound them, they were taught that it is better to give than to receive, that no greater love has one than lay down their life for another. Yes, they learned of good Samaritans, of forgiveness and prodigal sons, and for caring for others, of caring for its own sake, the sweetness and wonder of it all. Each day, each week, they were taught to love, and as a continuous deliberate act. Love, the 11th commandment. It was this that the Irish lived and held themselves to do as much as any other, to love one another, the need and wonder of it all in the living of their lives. And they did this by and through their faith as they settled in the places allowed to them, these being in every city of any size in the land. And it was in this that they came to a grounding on America, in America, an understanding of what it is, and understanding that in the political world about and around them, love finds its expression in the fairness of things, simple fairness. And it was that they came to a place here, their own place, working and forging their way up and in, always building on the values of the founders, that they held their betters to the promise of America. And as they did so, they strengthened and further validated the America to which they had come, as that which it must always be, and that is a continuing deliberate act. For all its tradition, for all the traditions of it though, even for the love of liberty within it, we must remember that America is firstly of the political realm, not the spiritual. As history's first idea place, America was a product of the human mind. By the very nature of its founding, being an American was not to be of a tribal determination. We are not a race. We are not a religious sect or a creed. Yet when in human history did humans not pray? More importantly, where in the logic of the mind is hope, or even love for that matter? Yet are these not engaged and expressed through and in prayer by hundreds of millions each day in faith across the earth, billions even? Indeed, what is human life without either hope or love? Is it not by and through hope that our futures are formed, that things are made better? Love, the need for others and the caring of them. Yes, is it not by and through love that our values are birthed and nurtured, the good and bad of our lives made clear and pressing? Yes, there is more to humanity than the mind and logic. As the body serves the mind, so the mind serves the soul. The who of us inside using the mind, engaging it. It was the great genius of the founders to craft a nation of structure and laws and to trust to those living in it such matters as hope and love, faith and spirituality. Indeed, while there might be some who doubt the existence of God, there cannot be any doubt as to the existence of human spirituality, the force and wonder of it, indeed the absolute historical reality and fact of it. We do hope, we do love, we do pray. In a closing chapter of Mount Olivet, Mary Riley, the matriarch of the Riley clan, shares a scene with her son John, the lead character of the book. Taking place in the morning quiet after a Saturday Mass, Mary speaks as much to herself as to her son. The most important thing we learn from those who raise us, she says, quietly, is right from wrong, the good from the bad. That's the most important thing. From here, Mary goes on to say that what she knows of right and wrong, she and those of her life learned in church, the teachings of the faith, a commonality of purpose in the living with others. And beneath it all, even the written word of the faith, there was for her an ever-deepening appreciation of love, the need and force of it, the true root and wellspring of all human values. Over the course of her 91 years, Mary had come to know the need to do it, to love, to live a life as a loving person. She had come to realize further that it was in loving that they got the better of them, their betters that is, that the keeping of the Irish down and apart had been a violation of the very values that had bound and driven them, the founders and their issue. This needed to be fixed, and not in retribution and false righteousness, but in persistence and courage, and not least in fairness. And so it was. So this is Mary Riley, born in 1902, come to America at 6 years, her life spent in a faith-bound community, anchored in the core values, coming to an expression of an ethnicity that wove itself into the very fabric of America, a weaving of purpose and yearning made real through each generation to claim as its own and to pass on again. We did get through to a place that's fair enough and still forming, and with tradition still held and justly cherished, it keeps close and real that it did happen, and so must it continue. It is in this, then, that our ethnicity, our Irishness, provides a comfort of mind, a sense of direction and purpose of its own, a reminder that we remain on the journey, a continuing quest for fair treatment in the daily lives we live and the lives of those yet to come. Fairness is what was wanted, and in time it was gotten, largely by a faith-driven sense of it and a gut-driven demand for it, simple fairness. And as its finding was done by journeys made, so much its keeping done by journeys yet to come. To fully understand what happened, though, to truly feel it, we need more than to hear of it or read of it as fact. Paging the legends of the dead, studying still photographs of the homeless tempest-tossed beside the Golden Door. We need to turn to the trials and trekking of it all, the stories, the real and the near real, even the outlandish. It is from these that we can best sense and truly appreciate the push and pull of the human heart, taking it inside to discover what makes us tick, what makes us be, the where and why of our lives, each one of us. Indeed, we speak of standing on the shoulders of giants, of greatest generations. But in this, we must understand what made them such if we ourselves have shoulders worthy of a good stand. And it is in knowing and respecting the traditions, the stories of our past, that we were able to do this and with good purpose. It is in this, then, that we Americans of Irish lineage are most fortunate. We do know how it happened and appreciate that it did happen, that America is not a fairy tale. There are those amongst us still who lived across the iterations of it all. Yes, it is we who know as well as any of the journey to America in America. And knowing it so well, and living it still through our own trekking in our own time, that it falls on us to speak of and to share it, to keep it fresh in the minds all here, so that America may remain as it began, a continuing deliberate act and not 1 cent less. I'd like to close with a story about Benjamin Franklin, perhaps the wisest of the founders. It was in Philadelphia, 1787 being the year. They had just finished the Constitution, it done now, and off to the States for ratification. As Franklin was making his way home that afternoon, a Mrs. Powell approached him. "So, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us?" "A republic," said he, "if you can keep it." "Yes, if we can keep it." "Well, I know of no ethnic tradition in this land that can claim a stronger hand in the keeping of Dr. Franklin's public than that of the Irish. None. And it is on us to know and to remember well and always the trekking of the iterations of those who bore us, not in prideful boast, but in deep appreciation and great respect for what it took to get it done and for the strengthening of the republic by the doing of it. From a place of oppression and want, we came to a land of freedom and plenty, and we made it better. Good.
Let me unmute. My God, there's a lot to unpack there, Paul. That was brilliant. So, I suppose one of the, the themes that you keep talking about reminds me of the mission of our own museum, which is to preserve and pass on, the culture and the heritage and history and the contributions of Irish people in America. But as you went through the generations in these 3 books, did you think that kind of ebbed and flowed a bit? Like, in one way, the more successful Irish Americans become, do you think that they become less conscious of their Irishness in a way?
Well, I have to tell you, I learned a lot getting ready for this because I read this thing. You go here and there and you discover things that are there that you weren't aware of. I think that's exactly it. I think that ethnicity is a very American thing. All right. Ethnicity is not a big deal in France. All right. I don't think, unless you're a Moroccan. All right. But I think we have one of the most diverse populations in the world, certainly for the OECD countries, for the 30 or so in that group. What we have our communities, and what we get to the values in the communities. And I was working through this thing about logic in the mind. All right, and into spirituality and the faith is that the founders did create something, all right, of a legal structure. There's a constitution. Actually, for all of the stuff, we still have a constitution. We have 3 branches of government, all right. And the problem is that people don't trust anybody any longer. All right, that's where the great problem is. I'm just parroting what you hear 5,000 times every day on the news. And the thing about what the Irish, which is not to say the Italians, it's an ethnicity thing, that this is where they learn the meaning of the core values of individual worth and personal responsibility, but overall and more importantly, love. That love is the driving force of civilization, civility, if not civilization. So in the idea of your organization, people focusing on how love and trust and responsibility, all right, was the ground and rooting of the Irish's success. So I think it's very consistent. Whether some folks just did too well or just forgot that that's something else. And then all the more for them to understand, or for us all to understand, that there is a softness to a nation's place. And that's what's gotten diffused and confused. All right, we have just horrible television shows on. I mean, these are all over the place. And so what I felt as in writing this was that what the Irish contributed was dealing with it and discovering America in America. So that's one of the things that I repeat that several times. We have to do that right now. In other words, it's not like the Irish came to three. I said in the beginning, the Irish in America, 1, 2, 3, and done. Well, maybe, but not. All right, because what is the Irish in here, in the fabric of America? What is the value of it? It's a sense of worth. It's a sense of your children should have values. All right, your children should be. We were literally taught to love. The brown babies aside. I mean, we were told. I went to St. Patrick's Grammar School in Bayshore, New York. I went to Chaminade High School and in Boston College and Fordham for graduate school. I spent a year with the Jesuits in Baghdad. All right, and you think about, and I expect this is similar to everybody here. You think about that. We were taught how to love. I mean, people who didn't love were not good people.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I have a reading about a priest in here that might be interesting in a bit. But we sometimes I say, well, love is not what you really talk about. It's all whatever. Well, it's all that there is. And what the Irish did for all the screaming and yelling and the fighting, all right, is they truly understood it. There was love there. All right. And what an organization such as your own, all right, can be talking about is we have a lot of successful people. Well, how did they get successful? What made them successful?
Mm-hmm.
It was an ethnic value system. That's what made them successful. And
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we need. When you get into pure Americanism, there's no emotion there. I mean, we talk about the flag, but I mean, in other words, it's a fact. That's what I was trying to get to. It's a logical conclusion. Obviously, where we should be born free. This makes no sense. There's no royalty that is inherited biologically. That's lunacy. All right? But it doesn't go to the next step. And the next step is a focus and an awareness of emotions and love and values.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to be developed. It's just not free.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
No, I think this is great. I think Patricia had a question which I was going to kind of follow up on. So Patricia said, why do you think many of the Irish descendants that are in politics, for instance, have forgotten the teaching of love then and the struggle that their own ancestors suffered? Now they can't or won't help others who are suffering the same. And so I think that was kind of part of my question too, that if we cling to these ethnic identities, which, you know, the mission of my museum says we should, are we in danger of kind of not allowing ourselves to understand other groups? And then Patricia's question is, you know, why you talked about, I wrote it down, the fairness aspect. Like, look at the Irish, you know, in the 20th century who wouldn't allow, you know, people of color to join unions. You know, sometimes we weren't great about sharing the fairness sort of thing. So do you want to speak about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, my middle name is Pollyanna.
Yeah, lovely.
But I'm talking about an institutionalizing of sharing and love. That's the Christian message. I don't want to get into a corner there, and it's not. I mean, there's nothing uniquely Catholic about the Christian message and sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when people came over here from Ireland, and I'll take correction on this from anybody. I mean, the people that we talk about, the 1845 to 1852, 53, they didn't come over here to be free. They came over here for the food.
Yeah.
Right. And when they got here, they were in the back of the line.
Yeah.
Right? And one of the biggest things has always been, I mean, from those times forward, is the Irish, all right, and the blacks have been competing for the worst jobs in the state, in the place. They're competitors. All right. And in my summer years in the 60s, which is, I want to be careful about that, of course, but I worked on the Moran tugboats in the harbor, right? And I was a member of NMU Local 333 with Joe O'Hare, and he would beat anybody up when it comes to greed, let me tell you, and including his members. But that's where they came from. That was where it was a dog eat dog world in most ways. I thought you were getting into the idea of politics. Tammany Hall. I mean, Tammany Hall literally picked the mayor. What, in the 1890s, and that they literally picked the mayor. All right, and they owned it. And there was graft and all these things. So I'm not trying to get. What I'm trying to get is what remained from it. And what is our experience? I was quite surprised to find, if I'm not getting into the question, this is an interesting thing. There are 3 iterations, okay? So I'm knowing everything, and I'm writing the book. I got the book. So of course I'm in iteration 3, I'm graduated, I'm there.
Yeah.
I was making a presentation to the Dublin Irish Festival, and I was reading a part from St. Patrick's Day. And as I'm reading it, it's cranky in my mind, you're in iteration 2. This is your world. This is how you think. So I can tell you that I feel, I was just speaking here earlier, that I can remember my parents, and they did all right. I mean, my mother was out of the P.J. Kennedy Publishing, who did the Catholic, whatever it was, and the Morans, which did well for a long time. I mean, they were doing well back in the war, World War II. And they definitely had a mindset that there was something different between them and the folks uptown. All right, that was it. You could see it. I feel it. I see it. I just instinctively, I know what my instincts are. How do you react? My children don't. What I think is important, and that's why I said at the beginning, here, 1, 2, 3, and done, is it's not done. I don't think it's done at all. And I think it's important that we hold on to it. So we're not holding on to people keeping people out, or Joe O'Hare or Jimmy Walker or any of that crowd. The idea is the mindset when we think about it, and our personal relationships. Even if it didn't have it, we can add it, but it's there. The way of teaching and talking about values. Because you can't really do that in many. The difference between parochial school and public school is in Bayshore, right? Is they didn't have it all the time. They weren't raising money for the little babies overseas. They didn't get that. That was all done by Kiwanis, all right, or the Rotary or something. What and you see this right now, by the way, the mindset of people about Catholic schools is they're very value driven. The Jesuits have done a great job when they have these sporting events and they have these things about Jesuit universities. I think that's very well understood exactly what's being said. And I think it's perceived as such. So I will absolutely agree that there's been a lot of troubles between the Irish and the Blacks, and it had nothing to do with values. It had to do with staying alive. So I do think that what I've written and prepared here is a very useful perspective. I think it's historically consonant history, but a lot of plays are there. So I'm sorry for going on too long.
No, I think that's great. You reminded me of, there's a very good article, I think it was published in one of the collections of essays, maybe the New York Irish by Bayer and somebody like that, but it was Timothy Marr, I'll write this in, and it was called Communal Loyalties, the Fireman on the Stairs. And it's this amazing article. He wrote it after 9/11, and he said he was struck watching all of these working class, Irish Americans going into a building that men in suits were pouring out of. And, overwhelmingly, like the FDNY were Irish and Latino, a lot of them, and he said, why is that like that? We get criticized as a people for sort of staying at the blue collar level. And in fact, here they are sacrificing their lives. And he was talking about that the values of the community are communal, whereas American, I mean, it's almost enshrined in the Constitution. It's the individual liberty, the individual freedom. I have the right And Irish people, you know, from way back were communal driven. And so he was talking about, okay, graft, you know, probably plays into it a little bit, but that actually a lot of people were happy to work as firemen and cops because it was in service. It was what their dad did or their uncle did, but it was being of service to your community. And that was actually kind of enough for them because it satisfied their values. It was a good pensionable job. Their daughter or son could do better than they did. But that there was an element of serving the community that was maybe absent, you know, in other kind of groups or jobs. So I just, that you kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah.
Does anyone on screen or on Facebook have a question or a comment? You can unmute yourself if you don't want to type it. I'm interested to hear from the Morans because I mispronounced your name. So no one has a question? Hello, Bill. Oh, hang on, you're muted. You got to unmute yourself, Bill.
Thank you. Hi, Paul. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you. Yeah.
Paul, as I read the books and I listened to your the essay at the beginning, I'm having a difficult time reconciling the Irish progression and creation of the culture and what's happening now in this country with the so-called cancel culture. Are we just in two parallel paths here that are never going to join, or you know, what happens? What happens in Irish culture is candidly, I think a lot of the values of America and the values of the Irish are disparaged, and they're being disregarded. So I'm just I guess I'm just struck with it seems like, you know, we had this progression not only in the Irish culture and other cultures, and it's hitting a brick wall now in terms of what's going on in our country today. Maybe I'm not articulating it very well, but I just don't know what the next step in the progression is.
You could, you know, well, you've read the books.
Yes.
Well, what I mean is this is how does this get? I don't want to get too utilitarian in this, all right. But the idea of the essay was that this was how our world was, and it wasn't a fake world. It was a pretty good world, right? And we end up with a group of people in this country who will not wear masks. I mean, that in the world that I'm writing about, in the world that you had at St. Patrick's Day, the idea of not wearing a mask at St. Patrick's would have been unbelievably obnoxious. Of course you're going to wear a mask. We all have something in this. And
they did during the flu pandemic, the first one.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, Spanish flu, yeah.
So what I'm saying, Bill, is that you're right. You know, you're right on the point. The point I'm talking about is this is what we need. And at the end of the essay, I guess you'd call it, is that we do know how it happened. I want to go back to this knowing America, learning America in America. When I was talking about the Irish not coming over here, except for food, they got here, they started eating, then they got stuck in their slum, but they joined and they worked together. And they did have this sense of the core Judeo-Christian values of sharing. That's what they did. And then some guy got out and they got mad at him, and there were resentments. It's all this stuff. We see it everywhere. But the core thing is I hate to say it, and I hate that it sounds so, but it's love. It's the idea of sharing. Love, in my mind, the greatest pleasure in love is doing it. It's not getting it. That's what it means. It means to love somebody. That's the power of it. And when somebody passes, what's happened to you is you can't do it anymore because they're gone. You can't love that person anymore because they're physically gone from you. I think that's the hurt. That's just whatever that's worth. But that's it. You see some of the movies with Rock Hudson and Doris Day in the 50s and 60s. Your mind blows away the silliness of a lot of it.
Mhm.
But that's where we came out of the world. But I think when we got into the 60s, we got very value driven. And I think we have people, thousands of people, and doing all sorts of things on Peace Corps Vista. Uh, so, but what we need is for these people to be more. I don't know how you do it, but the idea is that you get back to loving and sharing in the values, individual worth and personal responsibility. All right. It's interesting. They basically split between the liberals and the conservatives. Individual worth has to do with the liberal values, and individual responsibilities are seen as conservative. But for so many years, both parties were very consonant with both values.
Mhm.
All right. And
Mhm.
and the idea of a person, of people not breaking party ranks and votes, you see, is to me, what's broken is the two-party system. That's what's broken, but that's politics. We don't have to talk about it. But Bill, I understand what you're saying, and it's my frustration. And I think what you do about it, and I'm basically talking about people see better books and see better movies. All right, they respond to it. And we get this thing called The Walking Dead. I've never watched a minute. I can't imagine anybody going out of their way to watch The Walking Dead. All right, but millions of people do. So how it gets fixed, I don't know. But I think the idea of going to the core element of an ethnic group, and by the way, here I would cite the Hispanics. I mean, the Republicans, in my mind, have missed a gold mine. They are naturally conservative.
Right, socially conservative, yeah.
And they are conservative on values, on family. They're right there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And other places are not.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about Irish, you can wax romantic about it, but the reality is those values were there. This isn't made up, all right? And you can see the positive response to people when they say, I mean, there are surveys, I've never really identified one or put it in my pocket anywhere, about the expectation of a child who went to a Catholic grammar school. That's good. You want that person on your team. I think you still do. And my kids went to Jesuit high schools, or my daughter went to whatever, visitation, whatever that is. And they learn things there that will never stop affecting them. And it's hard for a public high school to provide that. It's hard. We have something called the Judeo-Christian tradition. And that term I'm using about the core values, that came out of something I did called anyway, those are the two secular values of the Judeo-Christian tradition. That's what they are. Individual worth and personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it comes from. And that's what Irish stroke Catholic, which are inseparable in many people's minds, certainly mine, that's what we were raised on.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. And that's what this talks to. So how else can you start talking about values without the context of some sort of community? So the idea of your group, Elizabeth, all right, is projecting it, and it's not that it's anti-Hispanic or any other ethnic group, is that this is a group who believes in this and they're promoting this, and this is how it worked well. I think that's highly valuable.
Mm-hmm.
This essay is not about Ireland at all.
Mm-hmm.
This is an essay about America.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with the Irish. I personally didn't wear my Irish knit sweater.
And Paul, just on a kind of a more personal note, it was your great grandfather or however many greats that came over. Were you growing up, aside from growing up in religious parochial schools and things, were you conscious of your Irish? Like, were all four of your grandparents Irish, or
Oh yeah.
how much of that culture did you guys live?
We are both sides of it.
Yeah.
My mother came from the P.J. Kennedy Publishing House. They did the Catholic Directory,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they had this religious store on Barclay Street in New York. And my grandfather, my mother's father, looked like he should have been a diplomat to Paris and London or something.
Mm-hmm.
He was pre-famine Irish for sure. They came over in the 1795 or something like that. Well, he's living, my mother's living on 72nd, West 72nd Street in the Brownstone. And this diplomat walks in every morning. He's a very straight-laced guy. He died in 52. I didn't know him very well. My mother runs into Jack Belford, who is the son of Agnes Moran, who is the daughter of Michael Moran, who started the Moran Tugboat Company. I don't know whether Pop Kennedy ever said this directly to my father, but it was this indeed. He said, "There's two things wrong with you, Jack. One is that you're post-famine Irish, and two is you're from Brooklyn." And he wanted nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
At that time, and subsequently, the Moran Towing Company became one of the most successful, literally, in the world.
Yeah.
So
I mean, Paul, in your house, like, were they, you know, did you learn Irish music, or was there Irish music played?
No, we didn't do Irish music. We did Irish families.
Okay.
We were definitely Irish. There was no doubt about it, but we weren't doing the
Culturally, you weren't. Yeah.
It was a culture of a sort. It was a culture that they were not sorry they were Irish. They were very happy about it. But it wasn't, I guess culture is the word, yeah.
Yeah. It's just interesting, you know, I wonder how much this has to do with, you know, kind of class and how far out the generations are. You know, like if your mother was off the boat, maybe you would have been listening to Irish music on the records, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe, and as well, wealthier people may have been more, you know, going to the Metropolitan Opera instead of going to, you know, Rosie O'Grady's. So I think, and that's, I think what I was talking about, that as the generations get further away from Ireland, the consciousness of our Irishness might be diluted. And so, like, you might be having actually a Catholic identity as opposed to an Irish identity in one way.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I could talk now, but I don't want to, if anybody.
Yeah, if anyone else wants to get in, please. And I'm looking on Facebook too. Did you visit Ireland, or your parents?
Yeah, I went over there once with my family in '88, and it was great. We had an incredible 7 days of sun.
Yeah. Oh, that was the only 7 days that year, probably.
As a matter of fact, the guy driving us around in a donkey and trap, whatever it was, he was talking about sometime in the recent 3 or 4 years where the sun went back. The sun went back sometime, I think it was December, didn't come out to the next December. Imagine.
Yeah.
A place where there's no sun for 12 months.
Yeah. And the 80s was tough in Ireland. Like, it was poor, it was run down, you know, like nothing was happening, kind of. Yeah.
No, we were definitely Irish, and we weren't denying it. But I'll tell you, my mother's father would not have enjoyed Irish music. He would have been staying away from that.
Yeah.
Well, the reasons you were talking about.
Even in Ireland.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. But no, it's what I found interesting about reading this thing after I wrote it was this I guess you'd call it the spiritual and emotional world that's separate from the legal and structured, and how important that is. And that's where we're really, I think we're really not doing so well. I think we came real close. I hope I'm not offending anybody. We came with skin teeth on the world that we're living in and the country we have, of losing that. That we came that close. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but the value system that drives and keeps things together was in great peril. So I don't want to get political, but that is what I'm talking about. What this thing is, what this thing I wrote about, it's about individual worth and personal responsibility and love and truth. I can read something about a priest from St. Patrick's Day. Would that be of interest to anybody?
That would be great.
St. Patrick's Day is the core theme. There is Mary Riley has denied her daughter Mary Kate's hand to a well-done Protestant. This is in 1954. And so there's some on that, but let me get to, this is a priest. Yeah. Joe Harrah is the pastor of Blessed Sacrament, and this takes place in 1968. And in 1954, Mary Riley, who was married to Father Harry's best friend, Patty Riley, all right, in 1954, Patty Riley was the head of a construction company. He gets killed in World War II. So Mary Riley takes over the company and keeps it going, all right? And she's done quite well at it. And, but she denies her daughter's hand to a guy named Charlie Olmsted, who was a very nice person. And so this is Joe Harra thinking about his own world, in his own life. And it's in 1968, and he knows he's going to have to be talking to Mary Kate, who for reasons is in town, and she's hoping maybe to meet this person whose hand who's denied. So Mary Riley had never spoken of it again, but Joseph Harra knew that it was deep inside her, now a part of her life. And then there was Charlie Olmsted, sitting strong and adrift, his wife and children away, his longing for Mary Kate tearing his life apart. And what of Mary Kate? Joseph Harra had not seen her since last year's party, and only then for a word or two. Then, of course, there were the rules, always the laws on which our lives are built. Charlie was married to Ellen. There were children. He's in church now, by the way, alone. He bowed his head slightly. What did he know of such things, of love and passion, of a married life? The most important decision he had made in his own life was to deny himself just these things. Yet it was his duty as priest to help other people whose daily lives were driven by them. His mind drifted back, away. The couples he had counseled as they crossed the sea he had never sailed. He shook his head slightly. This love that they know, how different is it from the love I have for God? Is the love I have more pure, more sanctified? Some would say so. I'm not so certain. What is certain is that I stop here on this earth. All that is in me goes to dust, nothing of me to follow. My legacy is how well I have affected the lives of those about me, nothing more. I am alone here alone, living this life in the hope of being more fully with God in the next. And the now absolute silence about him, there came a presence within Joseph Harra, the deepest sense of awareness. It is to love as best you can. This is all that there is. A fullness had now come to him, a complete sense of being, a self until this moment unknown, whole. Yes, he did know love. And it was this that he loved. He loved love in any and all of its expressions. He loved Mary Riley as a poet loves beauty, all the beauty in all the world, smiling and strong and caring, and by marriage to Patty, never to be tempting or touched, pure. And the love that she shared with Patty Riley was as real to Joseph Harra as any tree or river or thunderclap. He knelt forward, bowing his head, feeling the presence of his faith. Love is something that we do, and the truth is something that those who love seek. And this he can help Charlie Olmsted to do, to find the truth among the forces in his life. Joseph Harra did not have to have loved a woman to help a person find truth. He needed only to know the selfless wonder of loving, the freedom of it. He closed his eyes, felt his breathing ease, and sensed a fullness to his hands in his entire body. The words of thank you now came to his lips, soft and barely audible. Yes, thank you for this life I'm living, for this place where I find peace and rest, your home. You're welcome and comfort me. Thank you. So that's Joseph Harra. He's a very interesting person. I took him from a Jesuit I know. He's the only person in the books whose persona I lifted.
So that's actually, I meant to ask you that. How much did your own family, or how did you get the inspiration for these characters, the story of the generations of people moving through?
Yeah, there are a couple off the shelf. Mary started that way, and she became a very interesting person. I've got a longer thing to read about that if you're interested in it. But in any event, there's one interesting thing. Jack Hennessy, I had Jack Hennessy written out, but he didn't know what he looked like yet. And then there's a guy named Malcolm O'Hagan who came over from Ireland to Washington. He used to run the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. And he's about my height. He's a really good-looking guy. Good square head and whatever. Just a great guy. He's got an Irish brogue, and he is just great. but I'd never shaken his hand. So I went to a Friendly Sons of St. Patrick dinner, and he's there, and I shook his hand, and it felt like a gorilla's hand. It felt like he had knuckles the size of a golf ball. And so that's what Jack Hennessy looked like. So I took that. But the rest of them, one of the sons in St. Patrick's Day, he turned out, I think, to be my brother Andy. I didn't think about it until it was all done. But this is a fellow who never marries in the book, and he's a person who listens. And his great gift is to ask a question. Sit there and listen to somebody and say nothing, and then at the end of it, say, "Have you thought of doing this?" And everything gets fixed. And one of the interesting things about it, and this is about St. Patrick's Day, is this fellow. His name is Kevin, and he's got a surprise at the end, sort of thing. But what he is, because he's dead by the end of it, is that he helps everybody solve a problem, but the only thing he does is ask a question. And the point is this, and that is, you can ask the question. It's great if Andy or Kevin is there to ask it, but you can ask it. It's there. It's not like he performed a miracle and a mole or an arm is regrown or something. That would be the proof of faith. This proof of faith is within the human community to ask that question. And so he was a very interesting character. But John Riley, matter of fact, let me read something about John Riley. I sort of like this, and it's short. Whoops, where's that? John Riley, he's the president of Hennessy Construction, and he's been taken away from the construction during the course of Mount Olivet, where he's the main character, because of land that Hennessy Construction owns, and he had to get rid of it. And it's buckets and buckets of dough, and he doesn't like it at all. He's an engineer by training, and a builder by and a contractor by profession, and that's what he loves doing. So this actually takes place in St. Patrick's Day, and he's got a problem. They find out that his son is autistic, and he's just really at a loss. And so they're building a building down by the World Bank, and it's just started, and he's down there, and he's in the construction trailer and fumbling with his keys to get inside. But he's right near the hole. He's right overlooking the hole where they're putting this building. There was something to John Riley about fresh broken ground, a dankness to it, the sense of things decomposing, all the while anticipating new life, like land tilled to be seeded. But John Riley didn't grow corn or wheat. He grew buildings, and he loved doing it. A hole dug deep for a building to be built, went deep to ground, untouched since the ages of ice had entombed the continent, and it was here that John Riley met the earth. It reassured him, confirmed that he was a living organism in his world of rebar and poured concrete, of steel trusses and joists, the smell of worked iron and all sheathed in polished marble and great sheets of glass, thick glass, clear here and there dark. And I really love that, if I could offer that. And but that's what he is. He's a builder. And the story of Mount Olivet is he moves from this into an emotional type of activity, and he's figuring things out. And there's a bad guy in Mount Olivet, and he figures it out, and he gets the better of him. But he's had a whole course. It's pretty tough making an engineer interesting, but I think I did.
The engineers won't thank you for that. You know what makes it interesting, Paul, and I haven't read them yet, although thank you for sending me the set. And I've put the link to your website in the chat here. You can go to swampoodletrilogy.com and buy the books. But what I am actually interested in is that, like, it isn't the stock Irish character. Like, it's not the maid, it's not the gangster politician, it's not the the barely paid construction worker living in 5 Points. So that's an interesting, that the Irish community itself was more diverse than we sometimes think about.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Mary came off the shelf for St. Patrick's Day. And by the time I was a third of the way into it, she and Father Harrah became the major players. And
Mhm.
she's in Swamp Pool, and there she is Patty Riley's wife. Patty Riley was born in 1900. He gets out of St. Bridget's School or whatever, and he went right to a construction gang. He's 6'3" and all this other stuff, that type of person. He's somewhat off the track, off the shelf. Uh, and she's his wife, and she's anti-Semitic. She's everything that you don't like. All right. And what's really interesting about her is by the time she goes from that and her tutelage, in a sense, from Jack Hennessy and Paul Harrah, by the time she gets to Mount Olivet, just a little bit of the story, what they've done, Jack Hennessy in 1936 has been a successful contractor, and he collects land like some people collect baseball cards. And so when he dies, Hennessy Construction has got land all over the city. He leaves the whole thing to Patty Riley, and Mary Riley, she's over from Ireland now. Land is sacred. Land is where they can't tell you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So she not only won't let them sell any of it, they can't even borrow against it. And the taxes on the land are going through the roof, and it's going to destroy Hennessy Construction. So they sort of all work that out. But by the time you get into Mount Olivet, the deal is Mary is now 91 years old. The land's worth about $1 billion. And if she dies, there's a $300 million tax bill to pay. So what they're trying to do is get ready to do that, to anticipate that type of thing. Now, it turns out that the land goes from bidding. One guy comes in, he wants the whole deal. He can write the check. It's a big insurance company. And so John Riley, who's arranging all of this, he brings them all together, and nobody's really thinking about how much this whole stuff is worth. John has figured it out. So Mary's cut is $350 million after taxes. So
Wow.
he announces that at the table. John does. And so she puts her head down, and there's quiet. And she says, there's something wrong here. And then she points to each one of her children and the lives they've lived and the successes they've had. All right. And once somebody says that she wants to give it away. So one of her daughter-in-law says, but what about the grandchildren? She says, the grandchildren, right? The grandchildren, they've got your money. You still got part of Hennessy Construction. They got that. This land is totally separate from that. He said, they'll never get out from under it. But most importantly, they didn't earn it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't earn it.
Mm-hmm.
And where the whole story plays well through it. Anyway, it's very interestingly structured.
Mm-hmm.
So what she does is she says, there's a lawyer there at the table, and he says, well, what are the taxes on this? She's actually getting $490 million. So the guy says, well, it's about $185 million. And she says, aye, to the bureaucrats and their musings, that's where the $185 million is going. Well, that's not happening on my life. So she says to him, what happens if I die today? He said, the government gets the money. So she says, I want your CPA over here. I want to give this away today.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the rest of them all do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They give the whole thing to a foundation that Jack Hennessy set up years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the way this begins with Swamp Poodle is Jack Hennessy finds out when he's 16 years old on his mother's deathbed that she's not his mother.
Ooh.
That she came over in 1848 and she was pregnant by an overseer in Ireland. And this fellow was going to make her square, and he's going to get her out of town. He gave her some money and all this other stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and food for her family.
Mm-hmm.
So she has the baby. It dies on Tuesday. The overseer is to come on Wednesday. If there's no baby, he's not giving her anything.
Yeah.
Bridget Hennessy shows up. She's been put out. Her husband's been shot for a traitor. So she's been put out. Anybody who gives her anything gets put out. It was a horrible world.
Mm-hmm.
So Bridget Hennessy shows up, She's got two little girls with her. She's birthed the son in the cornfield or wherever. And she's delirious. She can't do anything. So Mary Mulholland, the mother of Jack Hennessy, the putative mother, she switches the baby. She gives what's her name? Hennessy.
dead baby away.
Hennessy. She gives him a couple of pounds of food, and she gives him the dead baby, and they walk down the road. Then she's got the baby. The overseer shows up, and she's on the boat to America. All right. So Jack Hennessy at 16, she thinks on her deathbed that he's the priest, so she confesses this.
Yeah, okay.
Now,
You shouldn't tell us everything because they're going to have to buy the books to read it.
so in any event, what happens is that Jack Hennessy has Jack Mulholland,
Yeah,
he is crushed.
yeah.
She has made up this whole world of the Mulhollands that Jack is a member of.
Mhm.
And she's talked about family her whole life.
Mm.
Down in the village means nothing. It's all family. She's got invented uncles of this guy and everything. So she's got 4 houses and a bank account.
Mm.
And she's left it to Jack. Jack goes to the pastor of the church she's in that night. And he gives it away. And the pastor says, by the way, the pastor does show up. The priest does show up. So he hears it. He knows what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gets very upset. He said, I'm not Jack Mulholland. I'm Jack Hennessy. All right. The only son she ever had died in Ireland 16 years ago at 2 years dead, 2 days old.
Mm-hmm.
So the lawyer's given all this stuff. He gives it to the priest, and the priest said, well, where are you going? He says, I don't know. He said, well, how are you going to get there? He said, I don't know. He said, but why do you have to leave? And Jack Hennessy says, I'd rather be known than somebody I'm not.
Mm.
He ends up in Swamp Poodle in Washington, which is the primordial swamp. And he comes out of that and makes himself something. So that's
Well, that is a good cliffhanger to encourage us. You've whet our appetite now. Yeah, that sounds great. So if anyone has a last, question or comment, or I'm sure some of the people on have probably read it already, so they're delighted to hear you. But I think this was great. I think I don't think we've ever gotten so political while talking about a book, but I think it raises very important issues, and I think it's good to see literature, make us examine our values and our opinions. I think too often, I mentioned Terry Galway's book about Tammany Hall. It's called Machine Made. He argues in that book that Tammany Hall, for all their corruption, and he's a historian, it's not a novel, but for all their corruption, Tammany Hall were actually quite progressive, and so the gun control laws, the factory laws, the workers' laws here in New York, especially after the Triangle factory fire, that was all on a Tammany Hall agenda, so probably the Irish were a bit more progressive and certainly communal, I think. And then Paul has this other side of Irish. It's good to, as I say, it's really good to read stories about Irish who were successful, because too often we read the misery, and we've put too much of that. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Can I just say two things?
Mm-hmm.
On my website, you can buy the trilogy as a gift set, but you can buy each one of the 3 books on Amazon individually. And
Yeah.
one other thing, this is a book called Looking for Jimmy. It's by Peter Quinn. And this is must reading for people who want to know about the Irish in America. It's basically the Rosetta Stone. It's really quite interesting. So he's a great guy too. So thank you very much. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I do too. It was great to have so many new faces. Tomorrow night, if you're interested, we have an Irish storyteller and singer, Bill Dunn, who highly recommends the trilogy. He says, we have a guy coming from Galway. It'll be on Zoom as well. His name is Andreas. And he's an old-fashioned, we call them the Shanachie. It's the old-fashioned way of telling stories. So if you want to email the museum tomorrow or just join us on Facebook, you can. And we have 2 lectures next week. One is on Monday about the American involvement in the 1916 Rising. And then on Wednesday, we have another writer. He was an editor in the Times Union, and he wrote a lot of work about the Good Friday Agreement and Gerry Adams visiting America for the first time. There's a few different things in there. Paul Chamberlain recommends the books as well. And then next week, the week after that, we have another book. Larry Kerwin from Boston, he was in that band, or from New York, Black 47. He's written a book about 9/11 and the Irish-American family trying to struggle in the aftermath of 9/11. And we have the New York State historian talking about the military aspect of the 1916 Rising. So we've tons of things planned. You're welcome to come to all of them and check out our website. We'd love for you to become a member of the museum. And I really think this was great, Paul. Thank you so much for coming. And I encourage you all to buy the book. I put the link to the website in the chat, but also just go on. If you Google Swamp Poodle Trilogy, it will come up. So thank you all very much for joining us. And I hope you have, Claire says, great job, Dad. So good. And that's lovely. And so thank you all for joining us, and we'll have to have you back, I hope.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. So take care. Good night, everyone.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. I enjoyed it too, Paul. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks so much, sir.
Take care, Jeff.